surgical tricuspid intervention not for everyone. These are my conflicts of interest. So we do agree, me and Steve. We do agree about a lot of things. I certainly agree that the prognosis of TR is bad. You also, the NATH study on the left. There are other studies as well, like the one in the middle looking at patients with congestive heart failure. Also, looking at patients with ejection fractions less than 50%, you saw Jan Tadilsky's study. So whatever study we've looked at, prospectively, retrospectively, we find that TR has a bad prognosis and associated with bad prognosis. Can't disagree with that, TR is bad. And we've also learned that certain types of TR are worse than other types, and certainly those associated with valvular dysfunction and alveolar dysfunction are worse. So the patients that Steve spoke about with MR do worse. And so Steve, you always, and I'm surprised you didn't say today, but you always say, put a ring on it. I mean, that's your favorite line. I think I've heard every single presentation except today. I've heard you say, put a ring on it. And so, angioplasty for all. And usually you show this slide, which I stole from one of your slide decks, which is probably one of your favorite slides, Beyonce saying, put a ring on it. But you're not like Beyonce, so we'll get back to that. So I agree with you. I agree with you that putting a ring on it is better than nothing. I'm actually the author of this the senior author of this meta-analysis showing that if you do angioplasty, okay, compared to conservative therapy, okay, you have a better outcome. Patients die less, cardiac death is less. So I don't disagree with putting a ring on the right patients. But what I do disagree with, and I wonder about it, I guess it really depends on who you're putting the ring on, Steve. So when Beyonce says, put a ring on it, it's very different when Steve says, put a ring on it. When Steve says, put a ring on it, it looks a little bit like Justin Timberlake. Enough, Steve. Let's talk about the facts now. So yes, we should be doing surgical intervention, but why aren't we? And that's my question really to Steve and the rest of the surgeons. If you look at the left, we look at the right, TR is very common. It's probably more common than aortic valve disease and close to being as common as mitral regurgitation. There are probably 1.6 million cases in the US, but less than 0.5% of these cases get surgery and get a ring on it. Why is that? And that's the thing I struggle with. Where are all these patients and why are they not getting a ring on it? Well, let's look at what the surgical data shows us. So who are the patients actually undergoing surgical intervention in the US? So this is a study from the STS database, 54,000 patients undergoing tricuspid valve surgery in a 10-year period. And Steve's right, that if you're going to be doing surgery, that most of the surgery needs to be repaired and mostly angioplasty. But Steve's also right that when you have MR and TR, you should be treating both, and I don't argue that. And the thing I struggle with is that here we see 86% of patients who had their TR treated, it was concomitant with another surgical procedure. So what about the patients who just have TR? What's happening to them? Why are they not being treated? So Steve and I agree that if you're going to have your chest open and have your mitral valve repaired, you should have your surgical valve repaired. But what we do see is that patients are becoming more complex. And despite the fact that operative techniques have been great, I don't know what Steve's surgical data is, but the surgical data for the US, when you have tricuspid valve surgery, shows a mortality that still remains in this series up to 2010, around about 8% procedural mortality. I mean, that's extremely high for a procedure. Some other data on surgical outcomes of tricuspid valve surgery. So here, for the NIS database, 45,000 patients underwent surgery for TR in the US in this 10-year period. 12,000 underwent repair and replacement. Most of it was for tricuspid regurgitation, as you can see. I'm sorry, I hope this was a bigger screen, but these patients were young, and I'll show you this later, 61 years of age, and prior stenotomy in a very small percentage. And if you look what these patients had, if you look at the patients with tricuspid valve repair, okay, most of them, again, 85% of tricuspid valve repairs in the US happen concomitantly with mitral valve surgery. Surgeons are not operating patients for isolated tricuspid regurgitation, whether that be from atrial fibrillation or left-sided disease. So in this case, was isolated, was only in 40.8%. Replacement, interesting, was also performed with concomitant surgery, and isolated tricuspid valve replacement was actually much more common than rings. So even though, Steve's right, we should be putting a ring on it, most surgeons in the US are not putting a ring on it. When they do isolated tricuspid valve surgery, they're actually doing a replacement. And once again, the operative mortality, we'll just concentrate on the right, for repair is 8%, and for replacement, just over 10%. So that's not really a very safe procedure in my mind. And it's not that easy to say that everybody should have a procedure that has an operative mortality of 8 to 10%. But I think it's because me and Steve are talking about different patients. So the patients Steve is talking about are the patients who are undergoing mitral valve surgery already. They're not the patients who are undergoing isolated tricuspid valve surgery, okay, later on. And let's look at some more data, and I'll show you why I say that. So here again, another analysis of the NIH database, 5,000 isolated tricuspid valve operations over a 10-year period, which this database represents 20% of total hospital admissions in the US. So that's approximately only 2,500 patients getting isolated tricuspid valve surgeries annually in the US. That's really a small number if the actual number of patients is so large. We saw 1.6 million in the beginning. If you look, sure, surgeons actually are operating isolated tricuspid valves more often. So in 2004, there were about 290 per year in this database. It went up to 780 in 2013. So the numbers are increasing, but what's not changing is the mortality. The mortality, which is this line at the bottom, has remained 8.8%. So isolated tricuspid valve surgery remains, again, associated with a high mortality. And surgeons are performing replacement in 60%. They actually, even though they maybe should be doing angioplasty, that's not what they're doing. So what are we doing percutaneously? So Steve alluded to the fact that I'm going to show you all sorts of percutaneous devices. I'm actually not going to, but I do want to highlight who are the patients who are being treated percutaneously, because these are not the same patients that Steve's seeing and he's operating and putting his ring on. So this is the TriValve registry. It's a real-world registry from around the world, putting together patients who are undergoing tricuspid valve procedures. Most of them are undergoing some sort of edge-to-edge procedure, like the mitral clip. In this registry, there were 304 patients. These patients had a lot of comorbidities. They were mostly functional. But I wanted to compare these patients to the 3 previous studies I showed you. So I showed you 3 surgical studies of who are the patients undergoing surgery right now in the US. Let's see who the patients undergoing percutaneous therapy. So here are the 3 studies I showed you in the beginning. The patients undergoing surgery are anywhere between 62 and 64 years. The patients undergoing tricuspid transcatheter interventions are at least 10 years older. They're 76 years of age on average. They're even over 80. Most are female, that's not different. If you look at prior valve interventional stenotomy, so in the surgical studies, that was about 13% at the most. 1 in 3 patients that we see who undergoes a percutaneous procedure or requires a percutaneous procedure has undergone already a left-sided intervention. If you look at transvalvular leads, about 1 in 5 of the patients we are being asked to do a transcatheter procedure have a transcatheter lead. They have a lot of comorbidities, Steve. COPD, 78%. I'd love to see you do surgery and put a ring on these patients. Atrial fibrillation, 78%. Almost 1 in 3 have ascites already. I'd love to see how many surgeons are prepared to take a patient to surgery for isolated tricuspid valve repair replacement with ascites already. And 71% have already had an admission to hospital for RV failure. The guidelines really have not helped us at all. So I try to understand when I went to Milano, where are these patients that Steve's operating on? Who are these patients? So I went to my echo core lab and we screened in 1 year. We took all the echoes. There were 12,000 echoes done in our institution, and we found all the patients with severe TR. Okay, so there were 241 patients with severe TR. We then asked ourselves, how many of these have actually a guideline indication? Because remember, our guidelines right now are very restrictive about who we should be treating. So actually only 30% of patients with severe TR should even be having therapy according to our guidelines. We then asked how many of these had an acceptable surgical risk. And Steve, you may argue that maybe I'm being too conservative here, but these are the variables I said. I said acceptable surgical risk was age less than 75, pulmonary pressure less than 50, no prohibitive general conditions, so they couldn't have severe renal dysfunction or severe liver dysfunction, no severe RV dilatation, RV dysfunction, and no LV dysfunction. And when I applied those criteria to these patients, the 73 with guideline indication, only one patient was considered acceptable surgical risk. So that's one patient for you to put a ring on, Steve. What about the rest? I'm not saying here, and I'm not here to say that transcatheter procedures are the way to go in these patients. Because we looked at the rest of the patients and we applied what the current protocols are for transcatheter procedures. Not all these patients are eligible for transcatheter procedures. So only half were eligible for a transcatheter procedure. The other half were actually already even far too advanced for a transcatheter procedure because they were either too old, they had too many comorbidities, their pulmonary hypertension was too severe, or their RV was just completely gone and failed. So I wondered, well, maybe, we shouldn't worry about the guidelines, and the guidelines are old. Let's just redo this exercise, treating everybody with severe TR that presented to my hospital. What would happen? How many more patients would actually Steve get if we just treated everybody with severe TR, isolated severe TR? Well, Steve, you'd get 4 more patients. So from having 1, you'd get 5 patients a year to treat, and majority would still remain at prohibitive surgical risk. Half will still be eligible for percutaneous approach. So I think what this says is that the patients you're putting rings on and the patients I see in my lab are very different, and they're very different groups of patients. So I'll conclude there. I think I agree with Steve, angioplasty is the predominant repair technique and is associated with better outcomes than conservative therapy. I think, however, as many as 60% of the patients in the US don't actually get tricuspid valve repair, they actually get replacement, particularly during isolated surgery. Tricuspid valve surgery, when performed, is usually performed concomitantly with another surgical procedure. The mortality remains high, and 8 to 10% mortality, I do not have that for a transcatheter procedure. Patients undergoing transcatheter interventions, and I didn't go into the whole field of transcatheter interventions, are generally higher risk, older, and have more advanced disease than surgical patients. And I think really, what I would really leave is the last message, which I think maybe even Steve would agree, is that if we really want to be impactful in these patients, we really need to refer them earlier for intervention, whether it be surgery or transcatheter intervention. Thank you.